Maya Jensen hurried down the rain-slicked streets of downtown, her thin jacket providing little protection against the November chill. At 24, she was barely keeping afloat working 2 jobs while taking night classes toward her nursing degree. The medical bills from her mother's recent surgery had depleted what little savings she had, but Maya refused to complain. She believed that good things happen to good people, even when life seemed determined to prove her wrong. The storm had intensified since she'd left the cafe where she worked morning shifts. Thunder rumbled overhead as commuters rushed past, faces hidden beneath umbrellas, everyone determined to reach their destinations before the worst hit. Maya's umbrella had broken last week, and replacing it meant choosing between that or groceries. Food had won. Through the curtain of rain, Maya noticed something unusual across the street. An elderly woman stood at a bus stop, looking disoriented and distressed. Unlike everyone else, she had no protection from the elements, and her thin cardigan was already soaked through. The woman attempted to step off the curb, seemingly unaware of the traffic rushing by. Maya didn't hesitate. Some decisions don't require thought, they come from the heart. Maya Jensen had always been the person others turned to in a crisis. Her friends called her the fixer, though she would laugh it off, saying she just couldn't stand seeing anyone struggle when she could help. This instinct had been instilled by her mother, a single parent who had worked as a hospital janitor while raising Maya and her 2 younger brothers. "We don't have much," her mother would say, "but we always have enough to share." Those words had become Maya's life philosophy, even when enough was stretched thin. Her apartment was a studio on the east side of town, the kind of place real estate agents optimistically called cozy when they meant cramped. The walls were painted in mismatched colors from discount bins, and most of her furniture had been rescued from curbs or thrift stores. But Maya had transformed it into a home with small touches, plants that thrived despite the limited sunlight, photographs of her family secured with colorful magnets on the refrigerator, and string lights that cast a warm glow during winter evenings. Her nursing textbooks occupied the folding table that served as both dining area and study space. The decision to pursue nursing hadn't been difficult. After watching her mother receive compassionate care during her cancer treatments, Maya wanted to provide that same comfort to others. The difficulty lay in financing that dream. Each morning, Maya woke at 5 a.m. to open the Sunrise Cafe, where she served coffee and breakfast to sleepy commuters until 2 in the afternoon. After a quick change of clothes, she worked reception at a local dentist's office until 6, then attended classes 3 nights a week. The schedule left little time for herself, but Maya remained optimistic. "This is temporary," she'd remind herself on difficult days. "Everything worthwhile requires sacrifice." Her friends worried she pushed herself too hard, especially after her mother's cancer returned and the medical bills began to mount. They invited her out, offered to cover meals, but Maya's pride made accepting help difficult. She'd been the giver for so long, receiving felt unfamiliar. That rainy November day had begun like any other: wake, work, worry about money, repeat. The cafe had been unusually busy, customers lingering longer because of the weather. Her manager had asked her to stay an extra hour, which meant rushing to her second job. She would be late for her evening class on pharmacology, a subject she already struggled with. As Maya rushed through the downpour, mentally calculating if she could afford to take a rideshare instead of the bus, she was focused on her own problems. Until she saw the elderly woman, confused and vulnerable, about to step into oncoming traffic. In that moment, Maya's concerns vanished. She didn't think about being late or getting wetter or missing her class. Some needs superseded everything else. Eleanor Richardson had lived through 87 years of triumphs and hardships. She had survived the Great Depression as a child, lost her husband in the Vietnam War, raised her only son alone, and witnessed technological advancements that transformed the world from the one she'd been born into. Her mind had remained sharp for most of those years until recently. The diagnosis of early-stage dementia had come 6 months earlier, though Eleanor suspected something was wrong long before that. First, it was misplaced keys and forgotten appointments. Then she found herself unable to recall the names of familiar streets in the neighborhood where she'd lived for 40 years. The doctor had been kind but direct: she would need assistance soon, perhaps a care facility within the year. Eleanor had kept the diagnosis from her grandson, Charles. He ran Richardson Enterprises, the technology company her son had built from nothing before his untimely death in a plane crash 15 years ago. Charles called regularly and visited when his schedule allowed, but Eleanor saw the strain in his face. The company was expanding internationally, demanding even more of his time. She didn't want to be another burden. "I've been independent my whole life," she had told her doctor firmly. "I won't become someone else's responsibility now." But independence became increasingly difficult to maintain. That morning, Eleanor had set out to visit her friend Martha, who lived just 3 bus stops away. She'd made the journey countless times before. She remembered writing down the bus number and tucking the paper into her purse, but standing at the bus stop, Eleanor couldn't find the note. The familiar landmarks suddenly seemed strange, as though she'd never seen them before. Panic rose as she searched her bag repeatedly, becoming increasingly distressed. When had it started raining? She couldn't remember checking the weather forecast. Her cardigan was getting soaked, but she'd forgotten her umbrella. Or had she brought one and left it somewhere? The digital display at the bus stop showed numbers and destinations that no longer made sense to her. People rushed past, wrapped in their own concerns. Eleanor felt invisible, a ghost from another time. Fear clenched her chest as she realized she didn't know where she was going or how to get home. She needed to get home. But which direction was it? Everything looked unfamiliar through the curtain of rain. Cars sped by, their headlights blinding in the gloomy afternoon. Eleanor thought she recognized a building across the street. If she could just get there, perhaps she could orient herself. She stepped toward the curb, her sensible shoes slipping slightly on the wet concrete. The traffic light ahead was green, though in her confusion, Eleanor didn't register what that meant. Her world had narrowed to a pinpoint of panic, the need to find something, anything familiar. A horn blared as she placed one foot off the curb. Eleanor froze, startled by the sound but not comprehending its warning. In her mind, she was younger, stronger, capable of navigating her world with confidence. The reality that she was an elderly woman with thinning white hair plastered to her head by rain, wearing clothes rapidly becoming soaked, about to walk into traffic hadn't fully registered. The gap between her perception and reality was the most frightening symptom of her condition. In her moments of clarity, Eleanor understood what was happening to her brilliant mind. The woman who had once helped her son with complex business strategies and read 3 books a week was disappearing bit by bit, like a photograph fading in sunlight. Another horn sounded. A taxi driver shouted something she couldn't hear. Eleanor trembled, suddenly aware that she was in danger but unsure what to do next. Maya darted across the street, narrowly avoiding a delivery truck that sprayed dirty water as it passed. Her heart pounded as she reached the elderly woman just as she was about to step directly into the path of an oncoming bus. "Ma'am," Maya called, gently but firmly taking the woman's arm. "Please wait. The traffic is moving." The elderly woman turned toward Maya with confusion in her pale blue eyes. Up close, Maya could see she was in her 80s, with an elegant bone structure and fine white hair now matted against her head. Despite her disoriented state, there was a dignity to her bearing that spoke of a woman who had once commanded respect. "I need to go home," the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong though tinged with fear. "But I can't remember where it is." Maya guided her back from the curb as the bus rumbled past, too close for comfort. The woman was shivering visibly, her cardigan and dress completely soaked through. "Let's get you out of this rain first," Maya said, slipping off her own jacket and placing it around the woman's shoulders despite her own now soaked blouse. "There's a coffee shop just down the block. We can sit down and figure things out there." The woman hesitated, suspicion briefly flashing across her features. Maya recognized the wariness the city had taught everyone to be cautious of strangers, especially the elderly who were often targets for scams. "My name is Maya Jensen," she said, offering information to build trust. "I work at Sunrise Cafe in the mornings and at Dr. Patterson's dental office in the afternoons." I'm studying to be a nurse. She pulled out her student ID as proof. I just want to help you get somewhere warm and dry. Something in Maya's earnest expression must have reassured the woman, because she nodded slowly. Eleanor, she said. Eleanor Richardson. The walk to the coffee shop took twice as long as it should have. Eleanor moved carefully, her balance uncertain on the wet sidewalk. Maya kept a supportive hand under her elbow, adjusting her pace and positioning herself to block the worst of the wind and rain. I don't understand what happened, Eleanor confided as they walked. I've taken that bus route for years. Then suddenly, nothing looked familiar. Maya recognized the signs from her geriatric care class. Confusion, disorientation, memory loss, possibly dementia or Alzheimer's. Her heart ached for this elegant woman who was clearly frightened by her own mind's betrayal. It happens to everyone sometimes, Maya said gently, not wanting to alarm Eleanor further. Especially in weather like this. Everything looks different when it's pouring. Inside the coffee shop, Maya guided Eleanor to a table near the radiator and ordered 2 hot teas. The barista, noticing their bedraggled state, added 2 blueberry muffins, on the house. Maya thanked her with genuine gratitude. Her budget didn't allow for extras, but Eleanor needed the calories and comfort. As the warmth began to restore some color to Eleanor's cheeks, Maya gently probed for information that might help get her home. Do you have family in the area, Ms. Richardson? Someone we could call? Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she sipped her tea. My grandson, Charles. He's very busy, though. Important work. Pride mixed with reluctance in her voice. I don't like to bother him with these little problems. Maya recognized the independence and dignity that Eleanor was struggling to maintain. It mirrored her own mother's determination not to be a burden during her illness. He would want to know you're safe, Maya said softly. Do you have his number? Eleanor opened her sodden handbag and extracted a water-spotted leather wallet. Inside was an emergency contact card with several numbers. Maya noticed that everything in the purse was meticulously organized despite being wet evidence of a methodical mind now struggling with chaos. May I use your phone? Eleanor asked. Mine is. I seem to have forgotten it. Maya handed over her phone, an older model with a cracked screen that she couldn't afford to replace. As Eleanor dialed, Maya discreetly checked the time. Her shift at the dental office had started 15 minutes ago. She would need to call and explain, though it might cost her the job. Some things were more important. Eleanor frowned at the phone. The number isn't working. Or perhaps I've dialed incorrectly. Her hands shook more visibly now, frustration and fear evident in her expression. Let me try, Maya offered, taking the phone back. She dialed the number labeled Charles Work and waited as it rang. A voicemail answered. You've reached the office of Charles Richardson, CEO of Richardson Enterprises. I'm unavailable to take your call. Maya's eyes widened slightly at the mention of Richardson Enterprises, one of the largest technology companies in the country. The elderly woman sitting across from her, wearing a cardigan from a department store that had closed a decade ago, was connected to one of the wealthiest businessmen in the state, but that knowledge changed nothing about what needed to be done. Wealthy or not, Eleanor needed help getting home safely. After leaving messages at all 3 numbers listed on Eleanor's emergency card, Maya faced a decision. She couldn't leave the elderly woman alone, but her obligations weighed heavily. Her second job, which she needed desperately, was at risk, and her pharmacology class had an exam the following week. Ms. Richardson, I need to make a quick call to my workplace, Maya explained. I'll be right back. Stepping just far enough away for privacy while keeping Eleanor in sight, Maya called the dental office. As expected, her manager was not understanding. You're already on thin ice after last month's absences when your mother was hospitalized, he reminded her coldly. We need someone reliable. This is an emergency, Maya tried to explain. An elderly woman nearly walked into traffic. She's confused and needs help. Not my problem, and not yours during work hours. Either come in now or don't bother coming back at all. The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone for a moment, mental calculations running through her head. Rent was due in 10 days. Her tuition payment was scheduled for automatic withdrawal at the end of the month. Her mother's prescription needed refilling next week. She took a deep breath and returned to the table where Eleanor sat, looking smaller and more vulnerable as she clutched her tea with both hands. "Is everything all right, dear?" Eleanor asked, concern momentarily replacing her own distress. Maya managed a smile. "Everything's fine. Now, let's figure out how to get you home while we wait for your grandson to call back." After gentle questioning, Maya pieced together that Eleanor lived in Oakwood Heights, an upscale residential area about 20 minutes away by car. Without access to her own phone, Eleanor couldn't show Maya the exact address, but she remembered the street name and described a distinctive fountain in the neighborhood park across from her house. "I can't afford a taxi," Eleanor said suddenly, looking distressed. "I forgot to bring my wallet with the credit cards. Charles manages them now." Maya made a quick decision. "I'll cover it," she said, not mentioning that the ride would consume nearly half of what remained in her checking account until payday. "Your safety is what matters." While they waited for the rain to let up slightly, Maya noticed Eleanor occasionally losing the thread of conversation or repeating questions. Each time, Maya responded as if hearing the question for the first time, preserving the older woman's dignity. When the taxi arrived, Maya helped Eleanor inside and gave the driver the information they had about the address. As they pulled away from the curb, Eleanor suddenly clutched Maya's hand. "You're coming with me, aren't you?" Fear edged her voice. "I don't think I can explain to the driver if we can't find it exactly." Maya hesitated only briefly. "Of course I am." The taxi wound through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, eventually turning into Oakwood Heights with its tree-lined streets and substantial homes set back from the road. Eleanor became more animated, recognizing landmarks and directing the driver with greater confidence. "There," she finally said, pointing to a stately two-story home with neatly trimmed hedges and a covered entry porch. "That's my home." Maya helped Eleanor from the taxi, paid the substantial fare, and walked her to the front door. "Do you have your key, Ms. Richardson?" Eleanor's face fell. "I thought. I was sure I brought it." She searched her bag again, becoming increasingly agitated. "Is there a spare hidden somewhere?" Maya asked gently. After a moment's thought, Eleanor brightened. "Yes. Under the blue flower pot by the side gate. Charles always tells me it's not safe, but I forget my key sometimes." The key was indeed where Eleanor had said. Inside, the house reflected its owner, elegant, traditional, and meticulously organized. Family photographs lined the entryway, many showing a handsome young man at various ages, often beside Eleanor or an older man who shared his features. "That's my Charles," Eleanor said proudly, following Maya's gaze. "And my late son, Robert. Charles looks just like him." Maya helped Eleanor change into dry clothes, prepared a light meal from the well-stocked kitchen, and ensured she took medications that were clearly labeled in a weekly pill organizer on the counter. Throughout, she kept checking her phone, hoping for a return call from the grandson. "You should take a hot shower," Maya suggested after Eleanor had eaten. "It will help warm you up completely and prevent you from catching cold." While Eleanor showered with the door ajar so Maya could hear if she needed help, Maya noticed a business card on the refrigerator with "Home Care Services" printed across the top and a handwritten note, "Appointment to discuss care options, November 15th. Today was the 14th, Eleanor had apparently missed an important appointment, one that suggested her family was aware she needed assistance. Yet she had been alone on that bus stop, confused and vulnerable. When Eleanor emerged looking more refreshed, Maya helped her settle into a comfortable armchair in the living room. Night had fallen, and still no return call had come. "Charles must be in meetings," Eleanor said, though concern shadowed her eyes. "He's very important, you know. His company is expanding to Europe." "I'm sure he'll call as soon as he can," Maya reassured her. "Would you like me to stay until he does?" Relief washed over Eleanor's face. Would you? I don't usually feel frightened alone, but after today. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Maya sent a quick text to her classmate asking for notes from the evening's lecture, then settled onto the sofa across from Eleanor. They fell into conversation that revealed much about both of them. Eleanor's life as a young widow raising a son alone, Maya's struggle to become a nurse while supporting her family. As the evening progressed, Eleanor occasionally lost track of their discussion or repeated stories, but more often she displayed the sharp intelligence that had clearly defined most of her life. She asked thoughtful questions about Maya's studies and offered insights from her own experiences with healthcare. You have a gift, Eleanor told her at one point. Not just knowledge, but compassion. That's rarer than you might think. Around 9 o'clock, Eleanor began to fade, her eyelids drooping despite her efforts to stay engaged. Maya helped her to bed, made sure her phone was charged and within reach, and wrote a detailed note explaining what had happened that day, where they had met, and her own contact information. She placed it on the nightstand where Eleanor would see it in the morning. Thank you, Eleanor said sleepily as Maya adjusted her blankets. Charles was right. About what? Maya asked. He always says there are still good people in the world. I think he's met fewer of them than I have. With that, Eleanor closed her eyes and quickly drifted to sleep. Maya quietly checked that all doors were locked and lights turned down before letting herself out, using the spare key to secure the house. She would return it in the morning on her way to work, assuming she still had a job at the cafe. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. As Maya walked through the wealthy neighborhood, so different from her own, she didn't regret her choices that day. She had lost a job she needed and missed a class important to her future, but she had done what needed doing. Some calculations went beyond dollars and cents. Charles Richardson's day had been consumed by crisis from the moment he stepped off his private jet at 5 a.m. The European acquisition that had occupied months of negotiation was suddenly threatened by regulatory concerns. He had been in back-to-back emergency meetings, his phone set to accept only calls from the executive team and legal department. It wasn't until nearly 10 p.m., as his driver took him from the office to his downtown penthouse, that Charles finally checked his personal voicemail. The first message froze him in place. Hello, Mr. Richardson. My name is Maya Jensen. I'm with your grandmother, Eleanor. She was confused at a bus stop in the rain and nearly walked into traffic. She's safe now, but she's having trouble remembering things. I've taken her home and stayed with her. Please call me back at this number as soon as possible. There were 2 more messages from the same woman, each providing updates on his grandmother's condition and whereabouts. The final one included the information that she had settled Eleanor safely at home and would check on her in the morning. Charles immediately tried calling back, but the call went straight to voicemail. His next call was to his grandmother's home phone, which rang several times before Eleanor's sleepy voice answered. Grandmother? Are you all right? Charles asked, his normally confident voice tight with concern. Charles? What time is it? Eleanor sounded disoriented. It's just after 10. I just got your messages. I was in meetings all day. The woman who helped you, Maya, Eleanor supplied, sounding more alert. Such a kind girl. She brought me home and made sure I was comfortable. She left just a little while ago, I think. Is she still there? Charles asked urgently. No, dear. I'm alone now, but I'm perfectly fine. Maya left a note explaining everything. There was a pause as Eleanor presumably looked at the note. She says she'll check on me in the morning. Charles made a quick decision. I'm coming over now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He instructed his driver to change course, then placed a series of rapid calls to his assistant to clear his morning schedule, to the security company that monitored his grandmother's home to verify all was well, and to the home care agency they had been about to contract with, requesting emergency overnight services starting immediately. As the car sped toward Oakwood Heights, Charles reflected with guilt on the past months. He had known his grandmother was beginning to struggle, but he had convinced himself that the occasional forgetfulness was normal aging, not the more serious condition her doctor had finally confirmed. Even after the diagnosis, he had been too absorbed in business to arrange proper care immediately. One more week, he had told himself, believing the risk was minimal and that his grandmother was safe staying in her home until he could finalize arrangements after the European deal closed. He had been catastrophically wrong, and only the intervention of a stranger had prevented potential tragedy. The home care nurse arrived just minutes after Charles, conducting a brief assessment that confirmed Eleanor was physically unharmed from her ordeal. Charles settled his grandmother back to sleep, then spent an hour reviewing the detailed note Maya had left, grateful for its thoroughness and concerned by the incidents it described. Before going to bed himself in the guest room, Charles instructed his personal assistant to find everything possible about Maya Jensen by morning. The woman who had saved his grandmother deserved proper thanks, and perhaps, he reflected, he had finally found the right person to help with a project that had been on his mind for months. Maya arrived at Eleanor's house at 6:30 a.m., having woken earlier than usual to make the trip before her cafe shift. She had called her manager the night before, explaining the situation and apologizing for her absence. To her relief, he had been understanding, telling her to come in as scheduled. Family emergencies happen, he had said, assuming her relationship to Eleanor was personal rather than coincidental. Maya hadn't corrected the misunderstanding. It seemed simpler than explaining that she had abandoned her job and class to help a stranger. She knocked softly at Eleanor's door, not wanting to wake her if she was still sleeping. To her surprise, the door was opened almost immediately by a tall man in his late 30s, dressed in what was clearly an expensive suit despite its casual styling. "Maya Jensen?" he asked, his expression a mixture of fatigue and intensity. Maya nodded, suddenly self-conscious in her cafe uniform and worn coat. "I came to check on Ms. Richardson before work. Is she all right?" The man held out his hand. "Charles Richardson. My grandmother is still sleeping, but the home health nurse says she's doing well, thanks entirely to you." His handshake was firm but not dominating. "Please, come in. We need to talk." The kitchen was bright with morning sunlight. A coffee machine that looked more sophisticated than those at the cafe had produced what smelled like an exceptional brew, which Charles offered as Maya took a seat at the breakfast table. "I've read your note," he began, sitting across from her. "And spoken with my grandmother when she woke briefly during the night. What you did yesterday was extraordinary." Maya shook her head. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Charles said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have called emergency services at most, not spent their entire day ensuring an elderly stranger's safety and comfort." He paused, studying her with an intensity that made Maya slightly uncomfortable. "You lost your job because of what you did for my grandmother." Maya blinked in surprise. "How did you know that?" A slight smile touched his lips. "I have resources. When someone helps my family, I make it my business to learn who they are." The smile faded. "I also know about your mother's medical bills, your nursing studies, and your financial situation." Maya felt her defenses rise. "I didn't help your grandmother for money, Mr. Richardson." "Charles, please." He held up a hand. "And I know you didn't. That's precisely why I'd like to help you." He slid a business card across the table. "I'd like you to come to my office today. I have a proposition that I think might interest you." Maya looked at the card-heavy stock with embossed lettering identifying Charles as CEO of Richardson Enterprises. The address was in the gleaming downtown tower that dominated the city skyline. "I can't," she said regretfully. "I have work, and I've already missed too many classes. I just wanted to make sure Ms. Richardson was okay." "Call in sick," Charles suggested. "Just for today. I promise it will be worth your time." Before Maya could respond, a soft voice came from the doorway. "You should listen to him, dear. My grandson can be quite persistent." Eleanor stood there in a silk robe, looking far more composed than she had the previous day. A middle-aged woman in scrubs, presumably the home health nurse, hovered discreetly behind her. Ms. Richardson. Maya rose quickly. How are you feeling? Much better, thanks to you. Eleanor moved to the table and sat beside her grandson. And please, call me Eleanor. After yesterday, I think we're beyond formalities. Charles poured coffee for his grandmother with practiced ease, adding precisely the right amount of cream without asking. The gesture spoke of a closer relationship than Maya had initially assumed. Maya is concerned about missing work to visit my office, Charles explained to Eleanor. Ah. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. The famous Richardson stubbornness meets its match. Maya has responsibilities, Charles. Not everyone can rearrange their schedule at a moment's notice. That's precisely my point, Charles countered. She rearranged everything yesterday to help you. Maya watched their interplay with fascination. Despite the obvious power imbalance, a wealthy CEO versus a woman who couldn't afford to replace her umbrella, Eleanor treated her with the same respect she showed her grandson. May I ask what this proposition is? Maya finally asked. Charles glanced at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. I'm establishing a foundation, he explained. The Richardson Family Foundation for Elder Care. It will provide services for seniors who need assistance remaining independent but lack family support or financial resources. His expression softened as he looked at his grandmother. The idea came from watching how determined my grandmother has been to maintain her independence despite her diagnosis. Eleanor reached over to pat his hand. Stubbornness runs in the family. The foundation needs an assistant director, Charles continued. Someone who understands healthcare, has natural compassion, and possesses the practical judgment to make decisions in complex situations. He met Maya's eyes directly. Someone exactly like you. Maya sat in stunned silence. But I'm still a student. I haven't even finished my nursing degree. Which the foundation would help you complete, Charles added. The position includes flexible hours to accommodate your studies and full benefits, including health insurance that would cover your mother's ongoing treatment. It sounded too good to be true, the kind of opportunity that happened in movies, not real life. Maya's practical nature immediately searched for the catch. Why me? You don't even know me. I know what matters, Charles replied. I know you risked your job and sacrificed your own needs to help a confused elderly woman. I know you treated my grandmother with dignity when her mind was betraying her. And I know from your actions that you understand what this foundation needs to accomplish. Eleanor leaned forward. My grandson makes it sound like charity, but it's not. It's a business decision. The foundation needs someone with your qualities, and he's smart enough to recognize that. Maya looked down at her coffee, mind racing. The opportunity would solve so many problems: her mother's healthcare, her educational costs, her precarious financial situation. But more importantly, it aligned perfectly with her passion for helping others, particularly the elderly. When would this start? She asked cautiously. Immediately, Charles said. The legal structure is already in place. We need to hire staff, establish protocols, create community partnerships. He glanced at his watch. If you come to my office today, we can discuss details and have paperwork ready by this afternoon. Say yes, dear, Eleanor encouraged quietly. Not for us, but for all the other elderly people who might find themselves confused at bus stops with no Maya Jensen to rescue them. Put that way, how could she refuse? 6 months later, Maya stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the city's finest hotel, addressing the gathered crowd at the official launch of the Richardson Family Foundation for Elder Care. Behind her sat Charles and Eleanor, the latter showing visible pride as Maya spoke about the foundation's mission and early successes. In just our first months of operation, Maya explained, we've helped over 200 seniors remain safely in their homes through our network of trained companions, transportation assistance, and telehealth monitoring. The audience, a mixture of healthcare professionals, community leaders, and potential donors responded with enthusiastic applause. Maya had discovered she had a talent for public speaking, particularly when discussing a cause she believed in deeply. She was almost unrecognizable from the young woman who had rescued Eleanor in the rain. Not just in appearance, though her new wardrobe, courtesy of her substantial salary, was certainly different, but in confidence. Working alongside Charles had taught her that her instincts were sound, her compassion was valuable, and her practical approach to problems was an asset in the corporate world. The foundation offices occupied an entire floor of the Richardson Enterprises building. Maya had assembled a team of social workers, nurses, and community outreach specialists who shared her vision of dignified, personalized elder care. The program they had developed was already being studied by other cities as a model. As Maya concluded her speech and returned to her seat, Charles took her place at the podium to announce the foundation's next initiative, a scholarship program for nursing students willing to specialize in geriatric care. The first scholarship would bear Maya's name. Eleanor, now receiving appropriate care and medication that had stabilized her condition, squeezed Maya's hand. "See what happens when you help a confused old lady at a bus stop," she whispered mischievously. Maya smiled. Her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Her mother's treatments were fully covered by her excellent insurance. Her brothers were receiving tutoring and college counseling through connections Charles had provided. She had completed her nursing degree and was considering a master's program that the foundation would support, but the greatest reward wasn't financial or educational. It was seeing the impact of their work on seniors like Eleanor, people who deserved to maintain their dignity and independence despite health challenges. Every time the foundation matched a senior with appropriate services or provided technology that allowed families to support elderly relatives remotely, Maya felt the same satisfaction she had experienced helping Eleanor home that rainy day. After the formal presentations, Maya mingled with guests, answering questions about the foundation and collecting business cards from potential partners. She had developed a polished professionalism that served her well in these settings, though she never lost the genuine warmth that had drawn Charles to hire her in the first place. Near the end of the evening, she found herself momentarily alone with Charles and Eleanor. "Quite a change from that coffee shop where we first really talked," Charles observed, looking around the ornate ballroom. Maya nodded. "Sometimes I still can't believe it all happened because of a rainstorm and a broken umbrella." "No," Eleanor corrected gently. "It happened because when you saw someone in need, you acted without hesitation. The circumstances were just details." Charles raised his water glass in a small toast. "To the future of the foundation and to bus stops in the rain." As glasses clinked, Maya reflected on the journey from that desperate day to this triumphant one. She had always believed that good things happen to good people, even when life seemed determined to prove her wrong. For once, life had proven her right instead. 1 year to the day after Maya had rescued Eleanor at the bus stop, they returned to that same corner together. The weather was sunny rather than rainy, and they arrived by private car rather than public transportation, but the location remained unchanged. "Are you sure about this?" Maya asked as they stood looking at the ordinary bus shelter. Eleanor nodded firmly. "Absolutely. This is where it should be." Charles joined them, directing workers who were installing a discreet plaque on the shelter wall. When they finished and stepped back, the three of them read the inscription together: "Kindness given freely to strangers returns 1,000-fold." The Richardson Family Foundation for Elder Care was born here through one simple act of compassion. Below was the foundation's contact information and a QR code that linked to resources for elderly citizens or those concerned about them. "Perfect," Eleanor declared, her eyes bright with emotion. As they turned to leave, an elderly man sitting in the shelter caught Eleanor's eye.